rights as well. Dr. Al-Jarrai, Director General, Islamic Organization of Food Security. Dr. Masood Jarrah Al-Marri, DG, Islamic Organization for Food Security. MashaAllah, I've confused the two titles. From State of Qatar, Ms. Dr. Marri. Dr. Abid Suleiri, Executive Director of SDPI. Honorable Ambassadors, Excellencies, Diplomats, Country Director of World Bank, representatives of UNDP, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. The first issue which I had to resolve right now is the fact that I usually speak in Urdu because sometimes my conversation is carried on television and it is easier for my people to understand Urdu. I've just been requested by my secretary, because of the audience here, to speak in English. Sometimes translations are lost. So I am confused, but at the same time, let me make this decision after 4 or 5 years on this occasion that I will speak in English. So, thank you, all of you. Thank you, the organization SDPI, doing splendid work for quite some time, for inviting me here. And this is a matter of serious concern for me. While Mr. Abid Suleiri talked about a ray of hope, let me tell you frankly, in the last few months, I've been very depressed. I have to find hope from where? Because it's the human intellect which will give me hope. Not the fact that the world is either abundant or not abundant, or we make the world abundant. That's quite possible. But it cannot happen that you dehumanize humanity and elevate the environment and ecology. That can't happen. It won't happen. And in the past, the history of the past few hundred years has been a matter of hope that with development there is a better understanding as far as humanity is concerned. And I was speaking on a number of occasions in the past few months, and there are people, I believe that the current era of world history is written by the global order which came into being in the 20th century. And the history of that global order is related to the history primarily of Europe, where Renaissance was happening, where tremendous advances were taking place in intellect, science and technology, as well as arts and culture. So that the footprint of the new global order has come from the conflicts of Europe, which were tremendous. That doesn't mean that there are no conflicts in other parts of the world, but there were more conflicts in an area where human thinking was evolving very positively, while the other areas were under depression. If I look at the challenges of the world today, there is a challenge to peace. There are wars going on, there is exploitation going on. The justification of wars seems very superficial. And in my life, I have not, and I would challenge somebody here who would raise his hand or her hand saying that these wars have been fought for peace, and 20 years later people still realize that this war was for peace, and there was tremendous change in the world because of that war. So if we are convinced that wars are not a solution, humanity is convinced. You have the driving wheel of life on earth, really. You have inherited billions of years of environmental change and evolution. And the best the evolution could do was produce these human beings whose DNA is full of love, hope, hatred and paranoia. Remarkable. You see, this is the best the evolution could do. We are full, when time comes for hatred and to make judgments, our eyes are clouded with that phobia and that bias. I am surprised, therefore I am surprised. I used to think that imagery of human desecration, of human destruction, that imagery would convince the world that war, killing, all this is bad. And that belief of mine has also been shattered, because there is more imagery available today than the times of the Holocaust, where reports came out years later, sometimes decades later, of what evil was being done by humanity on humanity. So tell me, I wish I could be a participant in a session where people would try and convince me, no, there is hope here. I was talking about the killings, and I didn't know that you were going to initiate the issue in looking at sustainable development, but you cannot have sustainable development without having a human fact, looking at the human footprint, looking at human decision making for sustainable development. And I had this huge list I read from about the killings which have happened over the past few hundred years, and then what led to the development of the global order, which was called the rules-based global order. So let me just go through those few steps rather than a lot of deep detail. There was, in the European world, there was a 30 years war, there was a 100 years war, there was a 70 years war, and at probably the culmination of the 70 years war in 1648, that the Westphalian thought and Westphalian treaties, two of them, came up, and which said two specific things. One was that nation states, the fact that violence can be done only by the state, the fact that arms can be held within the state only by the state, that was one determination, and boundaries were constructed of nation states. And sometimes this concept was taken outside the world, and we were so preoccupied by boundaries that you see very geometric boundaries in the north of Africa, where a ruler was placed somewhere and a straight line was drawn here, a straight line was drawn here, a straight line was drawn here. So the boundaries and nation states came into existence in the thoughts came up in 1648. And Henry Kissinger has made a very interesting statement. He has said that all the results of the Westphalian order and subsequent progress in that area was done without consultation outside of Europe, except probably North America. And I still believe that. So now this rules-based world order looked at the devastation of humanity against humanity itself. And when few years ago, I was speaking to one of the forums in Islamabad on the killings which have happened in human history, and somebody pointed it out that I must read Steven Pinker. His book, I forget, it's a very complicated title, that the Angels of Human Nature. And it's a positive book. It talks about the fact that there's less killing today than ever before. Probably he's true. And he started from the time of Adam, and he said there were 4 people, Adam, Eve, Abel and Cain. And out of 4, 25% were killed. So starting from that, of course we are better off. But at the same time, I think because of the traveling of human information and of misery, it's a very unhappy world. But I don't have statistics to back me up. I believe I am unhappy, and therefore I extend my thought process to other people, that other people must be unhappy. But somebody asked me a few days ago, how do we convince our children regarding the hope in human nature? You see, don't forget the world, but it's the human footprint on the world which is important. You see, and if humanity steps very solidly in a bad manner on the world, his own home is going to be devastated in the future. So the problems are very big today, and therefore these challenges have to be faced. And these challenges cannot be faced unless diplomats sitting here, unless thinkers affect human policy. And if human policy takes centuries to change, I'll be very depressed, because today the tools of devastation and destruction are in every hand. Let me define that. The weapons of mass destruction, which were managed and controlled through different treaties under the United Nations, non-proliferation, etc., was relatively easier compared to the new tools coming in human hands. The older tools required nation states to develop an atomic bomb. So it was easier to handle nation states rather than every individual. The new tools of destruction can come into human hands in a very democratic manner, or democratic in the sense that it is spread. The tools of artificial intelligence can be very devastating. And it is the slowness of human recognition for that. The first book I read was in 2013 or 14 when Nick Bostrom wrote on superintelligence. But I am glad in this year nations have gotten together to look at artificial intelligence, to look at the dangers of AI. Even the nuclear development which happened passed through very dangerous 15 or 20 possible accidents. And we are alive today, most of us, probably because of the fact that those accidents did not happen. And if you need the history, you will find those 15 or 20 incidents in history. Any accident could have led into further use of nuclear weapons. Moving from that, I recognize the fact that mankind has been interested in looking at the footprint of environment. And I would bring you back, what inspires me sometimes is the love which is around also in humanity. And what inspires me is Rumi in this regard, that without love and without the anchor of love in human life, life will not go in the direction where there will be peace. And therefore he starts from within himself. He says, you must recognize yourself. There must be love within your heart. Open up your heart and see where you have hatred and try and manage that. Then he says, then you look for love in your family, in your immediate family. And then he says, look for love and push love in your neighborhood. Then he says, in your nationhood, push for love. That's the fourth step he states and he takes. And then he says, look for love in humanity. He goes beyond that. He goes beyond identity of nationhood or identity of religion, and he goes beyond that and he talks about humankind. But then he makes the sixth step, which is very important. And Rumi, a few hundred years ago, imagine he makes the sixth step. He says, look for love and love every creation of nature or of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every creation, whether it's the clouds, whether it is the stones, whether it is water. And that is the first time I read really in that manner, that humankind must be looking for a comprehensive love situation. Then he says, love your God, love your Prophet, and then love your God. You can't start from up down. You have to start bottom up. You start loving within. And it is very important that all the prophets of the Abrahamic tradition and other religions around the world have looked for peace, have looked for prosperity in humanity through peace. Whether it's Jesus trying to feed the people, trying to offer the other cheek, but at the same time didn't have too much effect. Why? Now that is where I come up with why. It should have had it. Where you have prophets unable to change mankind, so what is happening? So how can we, with all that following, none of you can ever think of any following even 1% of that. So what is happening with all that following of Islam and Quran? And the Quran says if you kill one man, you have killed humanity, and if you save the life of one man, you have saved humanity. It doesn't talk about Muslims or Christians, it talks about human beings. With all that message around, humankind ignores that. Now, let me come back to what... so I was saying the fact is on environment, and before that, I believe the Prophet ﷺ talked about the fact that if we do ablution before namaz or salat, you must take care, even if you are sitting on the shores of a river, to use water in a conservative manner. So if I look throughout history and I look at European history, I had just forgotten the name of Carl Gustav Jung, and I just recollected sitting here. For the sake of environment, he isolated himself for the modern pleasures of electricity, etc., and he finally settled on an island on a lake in Switzerland and lived there all his life. He was famous because he was a dream psychologist, and people from the world over came for its consultation. And he had given up and he started living with the environment. because the consciousness of the fact has started emerging. This was in the 50s. The consciousness of the fact has started emerging. So, while I am confused at this, what will happen, and I am appealing to the human side of humanity and peace and love. At the same time, when I look at the world order, how did it come into being? It said nation states. It then, after the two huge wars which resulted in the death of 50 million people in the First World War and about 100 million in the Second World War, my numbers may not be so accurate, the United Nations got together, met in San Francisco. There were other people in the 19th century and the 20th century who proposed that there should be no war. This concept is important, ladies and gentlemen, for you to understand also. They proposed the concept of no war, and in that, one of the leaders of that movement was Tolstoy, the author of many novels, Anna Karenina, etc. And he was in the Crimean War, and he was surprised at a very young age, in the 20s, he was surprised at the fact that the war led to so much bloodshed, smell of blood in the entire area, and then all of a sudden they decide to take out the white flag of truce for a day. You come out, shake hands, bury your dead, bury the limbs, bury everything, and the next day come out again, take out your guns and start killing again. He could not comprehend what is happening. So what were the rules of war? The rules of war, and therefore he started a movement, and supported by an Austrian lady, forget the name though, and they started the movement of no war, and they even challenged the International Red Cross and the conventions coming up. They said if you humanize war, it's not going to ever be humanized. And you've seen, despite these conventions in international society, when nation states decide, some of the nation states decide to violate these conventions, they hide and violate. They dehumanize mankind. And then they're free to violate whatever they want to do. They decide something somewhere, then because of vested interest, they change everything. So they challenged that, for example, when the Red Cross was being established, they challenged the fact that Henry Dunant, who was the founder of the Red Cross, and
डॉक्टर आरिफ अलवी का एसटीपीआई की तकरीब से खिताब। एसटीपीआई की काविशें काबिल सताइश हैं, ऐसा कहना है सदर डॉक्टर आरिफ अलवी का। उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि मसनूई जहानत वक्त की अहम ज़रूरत है। पीटीवी न्यूज़ से फिल वक्त इतना ही।